I'm so excited today because we are going to be testing out a makeup tool dupe from shopmissa.com. You may remember that a few months ago I reviewed a new makeup tool called the Super Sponge. This was supposed to be like the second generation silicone sponge, and I will let you watch the review video that I did, but spoiler alert, I hated it. Despite what the brand tried to comment on that video over and over again, I feel like I did everything I could to get this to work for me because I really wanted it to work. I thought it was a great idea. However, in the end, I didn't think that it lived up to the claims that would have justified the $20 price tag. But just a few months ago, I saw this guy pop up on shopmissa.com. This is called the A+ Sili Dip Wonder Blender, and it looks exactly like the Super Sponge. The claims are incredibly similar, but get this, it's $1.88. So today I'm gonna be putting them side by side to the test to see if the Sili Dip can possibly deliver on the claims that the Super Sponge couldn't, and at a fraction of the cost. I'm crossing my fingers on this one, but first, if you're new here, hi, my name is Miranda. Welcome to my channel where we talk all things budget beauty. If that sounds interesting to you, then become the newest member of the Slashed Squad by hitting subscribe and the bell icon. So to refresh your memory, or in case you didn't watch my original Super Sponge video, this is a silicone infused and coated sponge. It is supposed to prevent the absorption of makeup. It prevents stains, it prevents germs, and it is supposed to give you 4 times the coverage with only half the product needed. On the bottom of the sponge, it's left uncoated, which will help shear out product or do a little bit of blending. Now, the one thing that didn't really sit well with me is that for $19.99, the brand still recommends that you replace it every 3 months like a normal sponge. So it wasn't necessarily saving you money in replacing the sponge itself, but it was supposed to save you money because you're not using as much foundation or concealer, cream blush, etc. Now let's move on to the Sili Dip. I'll go ahead and open this. So like I said, this is $1.88 and it's part of their charity edition. So part of the proceeds goes towards supporting education. Again, it's silicone infused and coated on the top, and the bottom is left uncoated, so we still get that blending ability. And just like the Super Sponge, it claims to absorb less germs, less foundation, while maintaining the softness of a traditional sponge. Both of these are supposed to give you the benefits of a Sili Sponge with the soft feeling of a traditional sponge. Here's what it looks like dry. Let me go wet it. And here we are wet. So it definitely increased in size. And here's what they look like side by side. Obviously, the first big difference is that the Sili Dip has a larger uncoated base. So it's almost half and half in terms of the silicone to uncoated ratio versus the Super Sponge, which is mostly the silicone texture. Just kind of squeezing them in my hands, the Super Sponge does feel a little bit closer to a normal sponge. On the Sili Dip, the silicone part feels a little bit more solid, and there is a noticeable surface texture that I'm very curious to see how that will help or hurt blending. After being low dairy for a while and completely clearing my skin, I treated myself to a deep dish cheesy pizza, and guess what happened the next day? All right, so today I'm going to be testing these sponges with the L'Oreal Fresh Wear Foundation. It is the best at the drugstore. So easy to blend and already has a lot of coverage on its own. So I'm really putting these sponges in a position to succeed. Let's start with the Super Sponge. So here's how much product I have on the back of my hand. We'll probably need less for just half of my face. So first I'm gonna swipe it on and go ahead and start blending. So the main problem that I had with the sponge originally is that I didn't feel like it played very nicely with skin texture or fine lines, and I really felt like I needed to rely on the uncoated normal sponge part to get an even blend. And at that point, like, That defeats the whole purpose of the silicone technology. So again, I'm looking pretty good on the even areas of my face, but it's not looking great where I have texture and breakouts. This is not a very raised breakout or dry breakout. I did moisturize before this, but I find that this silicone texture almost picks it up off of any part of my face that isn't smooth. I do think that it did better with this foundation versus the one that I tested in the original video. I'll go ahead and blend a little bit with the uncoated side. Let me see if I can layer. That was another issue, is I didn't feel like I could really layer using the sponge because it just started picking up product. I will give credit where it's due. I think that it's performing pretty well around my nose and smoothing out the pores a little bit. But overall, I'm still not thinking that this is worth the $20. Okay, let's go in with the Sili Dip. I still have a ton of product left on the back of my hand. Now let's see how this does. This has a much rougher feel to the silicone. I feel like I'm gonna need more product, but let's just see how far this goes. And as you saw, I did have a little bit of texture on a healing acne right here. Right off the bat, this does not feel as soft and bouncy when you just use the silicone part as the super sponge does. It feels kind of solid. So as far as the tactile experience, not a huge fan. My thing is I don't want to rely on the uncoated side because at that point I could be swiping the product on with my finger without absorbing anything and then just blending it out with a normal sponge that costs $1. I'll just do a little bit of tapping with the uncoated side to smooth it out, just like I did on the other side. Okay, I'm really trying to see a difference between the two sides. I feel like it performed pretty similarly over my blemishes. Like on this one, you can see it's pretty patchy just around the circumference of it, which is what I'm seeing over here as well. I mean, honestly, this doesn't have to perform better. If it performs the exact same as the super sponge, it's still a dupe for a lot less. Actually, to be quite honest with you, I feel like the side of my nose looks better on this side. Okay, I'm just gonna let y'all take a look. Tell me what you think. Here's the super sponge side. And here's the Sili Dip side. Does one look better or worse to you? Tell me in the comments. I'll be using my e.l.f. Camo Concealer in the shade Medium Peach. And this is the hydrating version, so it is relatively easy to blend. And this is the step that I felt the super sponge did pretty well on. And again, I think my under eye looks very smooth after using the super sponge. Go in with the Sili sponge. I think they look exactly the same. Here's the super sponge side. And here's the Sili Dip side. So far, I feel like if you want to try this trend, you can spend a lot less money for very similar results. All right, let's finish up with baking. I'm going to be using the Catrice HD baking powder. I talked about this in my disappointing products video because I hate the cap and the packaging is almost bad enough to make me stop using the powder, but it is one of the softest drugstore baking powders. Okay, picking some up with the super sponge. And again, this is what I found the super sponge to work best at. And I felt like it also applies the powder in a very, very even application, so the entire under eye gets covered with the same level of powder. It's not going to be patchy once you wipe off the excess. You can really see the texture of the sponge when the powder is on it. Let's see if it applies as evenly. So here's one application where I feel the super sponge might do a little better. And you can actually see on the sponges, I think that the Sili Dip held on to more of my powder than the super sponge. And whereas here you see like the same level of powder the whole way through, here it kind of gets patchy towards the end. And we have a little bit of fallout that the sponge didn't really hold on to or apply, it just fell off the sponge. You know what I think it is? Because I mentioned that there's a little bit of a texture to the silicone on the Sili Dip, and I think that texture is actually trapping some of the powder, so it's not ending up on my face, or it's ending up a little bit patchy in some areas. Very interessante. Okay, so while I let my powder bake, I'm just going to run through a quick makeup routine with my brows and a little bit on the eyes. Okay, brushing off the powder before I go in with mascara. I'm definitely giving that round to the super sponge. There is a little bit of patchiness left behind on this side where the powder wasn't super even. Is it a point that can justify the $18.20 difference? That's for you to decide. After testing these silicone-infused sponges side by side, my verdict is that the $1.88 Sili Dip sponge is definitely a suitable dupe for the $20 super sponge. When it comes to foundation and concealer, I feel like they performed so similarly. There was not any noticeable difference. The only thing the super sponge did better was apply powder. And for me personally, that's not enough to justify the price difference. As I mentioned, I do like the feel of the super sponge better on the skin. I do think that it is more similar to a normal sponge in that you do have that bounce and softness. But at the end of the day, if the performance is so similar and you're interested in trying this type of tool, I would say go with the cheaper one. See if you even like this type of tool, and from there you can decide maybe you want to try the more expensive version. What do you think of this type of makeup sponge, and have you tried either of them before? Let me know in the comments below. Today's shout out goes to Alice. Thanks for being a member of the Slashed Squad, and join me over in this video next where I share the best beauty deals at Costco. The savings are insane. I'll see you over there. Bye!